Hello, Geoff Crisp here from University of Canberra, and I'm here with Michelle Grattan to discuss the week in politics. Hello, Michelle.
Hi, Geoff.
So, Michelle, we now have Prime Minister Scott Morrison and his new ministry, which has been installed, including promotions to his cabinet. So we notice the changes include the first Aboriginal person to be appointed to a cabinet. So we have Ken Wyatt, who will be the Minister for Indigenous Australians. So this has always been a particularly challenging role. Do you think this will be any easier for him, given that he's an Indigenous person himself?
Well, I think it has pluses and minuses. He will be able to relate to the Indigenous community. They have been very welcoming of the appointment. But on the other side, of course, the expectations will be huge. And it's always difficult to meet those expectations, especially in this area, which is so challenging. It's challenging at a symbolic level, and the whole question of trying to get recognition of Indigenous people in the Constitution comes up there, and that is very, very difficult to get a referendum through. And it's challenging at the practical level. These communities really are often suffering from very poor conditions. People don't have the opportunities they should have, and yet changing the conditions, giving more opportunity, is often a lot more complicated than you'd think at first glance.
So a very important appointment for the government, I would have thought.
And one that we really hope goes well, but a lot of hard work and goodwill will be required for that to happen.
So Morrison has put one of his friends, Stuart Robert, into the cabinet overseeing the NDIS and service delivery, including making the public service more efficient, we've heard. So do you think this means that Scott Morrison has this agenda about implementation as a priority?
Yes, I do, and he recently lectured senior public servants on the importance of this, and I think the fact that he's made one of his close associates the minister in the implementation area is also a mark of the emphasis that he's given it. Now, the NDIS in particular, I think, has had early problems, teething problems. It's a big scheme, a big reform on the scale of Medicare all those years ago, but it does need to be got through this early phase more efficiently, and I think to have a minister who's keeping a day-to-day eye on that will be quite important.
So another big agenda item is the tax package from the government. So we've seen that the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, has insisted again that the government's tax package goes through in its entirety. Now, we heard before the election that Labor was going to oppose that it just wanted the first tranche, and that's what it would support. So do you think now, given the election result, that the opposition will now allow the bill to go through in its entirety, or do you still think that they will just support the first tranche?
There's no predicting that at the moment, and of course the new Labor leader, Anthony Albanese, has really refused to go down the track of answering that question. He's said he wants to consult his caucus. There's a bit of talk that maybe Labor would support the first and second parts of this plan rather than only the first, but that's only speculation at this stage. If the government couldn't get the package through in its entirety, I think it would have to split it because it does need to deliver those first tax cuts. But on the other hand, there is a lot of pressure on Labor, having lost the election, to say, well, that was central to the government's program, therefore we will let it through. And the other option, of course, is that the government might get enough crossbench support in the Senate for it to go through even without Labor. So it's very much a work in progress at the moment, or will be when Parliament comes back, and we have heard during the week that Parliament is likely to come back about the first week in July. So that indicates that the government really wants this tax matter sorted out as soon as it can.
Yeah, so another interesting thing that we'll keep our eye on. So speaking of the opposition, So we've seen that Anthony Albanese has been elected unopposed as the Labor leader. We have Richard Marles replacing Tanya Plibersek as the deputy, and we have Christina Keneally becoming the deputy Senate leader, and Penny Wong, of course, retaining the position of Senate leader. So do you think Anthony Albanese's style will actually go down a bit better than perhaps Bill Shorten's did?
It's a more casual style. He relates well to people, and I think that he crosses all sorts of divides, class divides, political divides. You'll even find some Liberal voters who find him a person who's easy to be in sync with, as it were. However, I think that he has real problems in the next 3 years. He's got to oversee the reshaping of Labor's program. Clearly, a number of policies have got to be dramatically modified or ditched, and all that is always a painful process. So it's going to be a very testing period for Labor. On the other hand, it didn't lose the election by a great deal, so the next election is quite winnable if they can strike a balance between proposing change but not frightening the horses, as it were, as they did in this election.
Indeed. So Labor's frontbench also has had a bit of a shake-up, but we see that Bill Shorten is going to be given a spot there. So do you think this is actually wise for a party that's perhaps going to go through a bit of a soul-searching time, and actually given the result of the election, given that it was expected to win and it didn't?
I think if he has chosen to stay in Parliament, as he has, then he really has to be given a frontbench role. To relegate a former leader to the backbench is really a bit of an insult. Not showing respect would generate resentment, and that's not a good idea. However, I have doubts about the wisdom of him staying in Parliament at all. I think it is very difficult for a former leader to see someone else take over, to see his own programs having to be changed or dismantled, to be diminished in his own role. Now, some people can do it, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it is quite hard psychologically for a person to be able to behave well, be really supportive of a new leader in that situation. They think they will, they say they will, but there's always a temptation, even in private, to just say, well, if I'd been doing it, it would have been different. This isn't a good way to go, whatever. And the nature of politics is that the private conversations leak out and it leads to tears. So I think personally that if Bill Shorten finds after a few months he's not comfortable in this new situation, he should consider another career.
Well, thanks very much, Michelle.
Thank you.